How satisfied are we with our lives? How happy are we? What kinds of things do we value? That gets more into the kind of economic realm, right? Because economics is really all about value and how people value things. So we can put a number on that, or we can ask people about that as well. And then I ran out of room. I didn't have room for a fourth column, so I had to put at the bottom this whole other category. I had to squeeze in here social structures as well, culture, inequality, poverty, development. A lot of these are actually really important for the places you may want to travel and do a project on. And certainly the ones that Kenley and Danny and Kelsey did were all very much related to some of these issues. Say, for instance, the lobster divers in Mosquito, the Mosquito Indians, they had these issues about being poor and undereducated, being part of a minority ethnic group because they're Native Americans, and so forth, right? So right away off the bat, we can think of a lot of variables that go along with a particular topic like that, okay? And so essentially what we want to do then in developing our research question is to take some of these variables and we're going to play the mix and match game. And we're not going to do this just kind of arbitrarily. Oftentimes we want to think about what we know about a particular question through the literature or through people who have some expertise. But basically what we want to do is kind of take these then and combine them in such a way that they give us a question that's based in variables. So if we look at the variables then that are kind of embedded in these questions here, like for instance for Kelsey's project, how does the mosquito diver's lack of formal education influence their decision to participate in risky diving practices? What are the variables that we see there? Education is one, right? What else? Occupation, good, that's their job, right? Anything else? One I just said a minute ago, right? Is there mosquito? What does mosquito mean? It's a Native American ethnic group that's a minority in this society, right? And then we have practices that they engage in, the things that they do as part of their job. So you could say that's related to their occupation, right? So right there, just in that one simple sentence, there's actually embedded probably 4 or so variables, right? And so we're basically putting our question into terms of those variables, and we can say, okay, that's something we can study. We know what to look for then because we know what those variables are, and our next step would then be how to measure them. Same thing with Kenley's question, how do attitudes towards traditional medical practices shape doctors in Ghana diagnostic decisions? Again, you've got things like occupation, you've got belief systems in there with traditional medicine, and so forth. Attitudinal variables. The variables are embedded in that question, so by kind of taking them together now, we've gone from a broad interest into something that's a lot more specific, right? A lot more specific, and something that we say, you know, I'm getting a little bit better idea of how I could actually study this. This is starting to point us in the direction of research, versus before we were getting pointed in the direction of a place or a group, and that told us where to buy a ticket for, but it didn't do much else than that, right? That was kind of the limit of what we could do there. So let's try it out. Let's do a little break and turn to a partner. I want you to try this out. Can you actually draw kind of an X, Y, or can you write out in a sentence like those? You can do it either way or both ways if you want. Let's take like just a couple minutes, maybe 5 minutes max, to try to do this. If you have an idea, if you don't have any idea, you can just make something up, right? Make up a question about some place in the world that's interesting to you. Sorry, am I off the screen now here, Jen? Make up something, and I want to know in a couple minutes, what did you come up with? What are your variables that would be embedded in your research question? Go.
It could be something like, how does the presence of foreign or American like tourism industries in the Caribbean affect local economies?
Right, okay, so did you all hear that? How does the presence of tourism in the in the Caribbean, maybe eventually we kind of like focus in on a more specific location, how is that affecting the local economy of that particular place, right? So what are the variables of that?
That's all I got so far. You don't have to do this.
Yeah, so that's all the stuff that's affected, right? That was the stuff you said, basically the economic things that are impacted by something else, right? What was the thing that did impact it?
The foreign, or tourism.
Tourism,
Well,
right.
Yeah, that's what I meant by
That's
foreign.
right. So that's basically kind of in your question the X, right? And the Y then are these local kind of economic impacts, right? And there's probably a ton of stuff that if we kind of brainstormed about it for a while, we'd come up with a lot of other things, especially if we start to dive into what the particular location might be. Like say we decided it's Jamaica, or maybe a city in Jamaica, or maybe a community in Jamaica. Dun, 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 going down, like for instance, Professor Baptiste, who teaches environmental studies, is actually in Jamaica this semester doing research there. So she's an expert on that. She could tell us, okay, I know, I've been there, I know what's going on with tourism there and how that affects it. So she could probably give you some good advice about then taking the next step in those variables and saying, okay, here's some additional issues, even more specific than that, already getting more specific question about tourism and the economy. Okay, good start. Anybody else? Yeah?
So what I thought about was the impact of sports in a positive way on children in very underdeveloped communities. It's not specific to any particular location, but like really poor kids who grow up in slums, or like such, and how their decision to or involvement in community sports has a positive impact on their life, which I would probably trying to measure in terms of do they enroll in school, do they stay in school longer, is their dropout much later, something like that, an educational variable.
Right, good. So in that situation, we know that our X is participation in sports of some type, right? And our Y is the one example you gave, there might be other ones too, is educational attainment of some sort, right? Or maybe educational performance. What kind of grades do they get? How well do they do on tests of various types? How well do they concentrate in school? Stuff like that, right? So, and then there's probably a lot of other things that potentially are impacted by participation in sport, aside from just their educational stuff, like does it impact family life or other things like that? And you have mentioned that, you know, the particular population you'd be interested in are those kids who are the least advantaged, right? So that's a variable that's in there as well, right? So that's the basic idea, right? Is that we want to take that and we want to think about how do those things connect together. And once we get that, then we can say, okay, we're starting to get somewhere. We know kind of what we want to study, at least in broad brush with some of these examples. We kept going, we could get more and more specific, and we did some of that research that we talked about before. We could get more specific. And then the next step is basically to start thinking about how do we actually do the research? How are we going to get to that next step? So we kind of did the intro part was the question, was that first step, right? Then we said concepts. That's kind of what we mean by variables in this variable analysis. We're thinking about the key concepts or variables that are part of our question. So we kind of got through those first two phases. Now we want to start to think about who would we choose to talk to? And again, that's something that's kind of implicit in a lot of the questions that we have. But the term we use for that in social sciences is sampling. Sampling is basically deciding who we're going to talk to, who we're going to get information from with our research. Most social science research comes from asking people about stuff. Whether it's a survey, interview, or finding some kind of economic data. Even GIS is based on census data where you ask people questions about stuff. So in most cases, we actually have to ask people questions to get social science data of some form or another. Then before we do that, we have to decide who we're going to talk to. Because in most cases, what we find is that the people we want to talk to are part of some population. Depending on what we're interested in studying. Could be Hamilton, right? Population of Hamilton.